Hey, do you ever feel unprepared?
Yes.
A lot.
Every day.
Every day. Yeah, it's never a good feeling, right? You know,
Nope.
I think everyone was a little nervous today because I was late.
Ah.
Not just late for me. I mean, I was pretty much walking up at 9 o'clock. I'm glad we had people who handle things while I'm gone. But you know, sometimes you're completely unprepared for something. One time I went, and I may have shared this story with you before, but it was I was thinking about being unprepared. This is what I thought of. I was asked to speak at something, but I was told it was just like 5 minutes, just say something quick. And when I got there, and I looked at the schedule of events, I realized that I was the main speaker for the entire event.
Oh my.
Plot twist. Nice.
Yeah, hashtag awkward. Hashtag praying to Jesus. But it was like, I felt completely unprepared, and it was like I kind of panicked. Don't worry, it turned out great. It was probably being unprepared sometimes helps you, because you see great things happen. And we're going to be looking at something today where they get caught unprepared for something. And Jesus shows up and, well, as you can guess, he kind of saves the day. And we're looking at a series right now called Seven, and it's signs that mean something more. And we're looking at a book called John. Now, some of you are going, that's good, because Jeff won't be talking about Luke all the time. But I'll manage to work it in. And John is one of the four Gospels. It's my favorite non-synoptic Gospel. And that's a big fancy word we throw out to make it sound like we know what we're doing and talking about synoptic. But three of the Gospels tell the story of Jesus in a pretty similar way. And if you've ever read the Bible, you saw that. You know, if I remember reading Matthew first time through, I'm like highlighting everything because I could only do it for like 6 months, and then I had to stop highlighting because your whole life they tell you not to write in a book or anything at school, and I just can't get over that. It's fine to highlight anyway. So I was highlighting the entire New Testament because it was all new to me. I'm like, this is so cool. The only thing I didn't highlight ands and thens or something. It was a lot of highlighting. I think I used a whole highlighter. But you know, I read Matthew, and then I was like, oh, that's cool. And I turned to Luke, to Mark, and I'm like, yeah, this seems kind of similar. You know, like I think I read this story before. You know, there's a couple things you're like, okay, maybe, but yeah, what? And then you get to Luke, and you're like, seriously? Like, this is a three-peat? Like, they're kind of the same thing. It's like the Steelers winning the Super Bowl. You just expect it.
Okay. Okay.
It's like the Eagles not making it.
Oh, ouch.
You know, but John, then you get to John, and John is like this totally different look at things. And some of you remember, like, Sesame Street, you know, yes. One of these kids is doing their own thing. Mm-hmm. You know, like 3 people are jumping rope and one is playing hopscotch, and you got to figure out. John is one of these kids that's doing his own thing. And he's got these 7 miracles, these 7 signs, he calls them, that we learn something about Jesus, because when Jesus does something, it means a whole lot more. He's not just doing miracles to do miracles. Like, if I could do miracles, I would just do miracles to do miracles. You know, because I'm Jeff and I would do that. But Jesus has a greater meaning behind these things. And so we're looking at one of those. The first one is in John chapter 2. And if you're following along in a Bible, it's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. There you've memorized the first 4 Bibles, books of the New Testament already. Or you can pop open YouVersion and it'll pop up. We're really just going to land here today. And it says this. On the 3rd day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, they have no more wine. This is the 3rd day. Now, you're thinking the 3rd day of what? Maybe. And basically, he started having a couple disciples follow him. And if you read right before this, it's kind of this cool story. And so he's got these rookie disciples. His first guys are following him. You know, they've been following for like 3 days. And, you know, I don't know how it comes down that they get invited to the wedding. Is it, you know, like he got the invitation and it said +1. He's like, well, how about like +5? You know, some of you know what I mean when you get like that wedding invitation. It's always that +1, you know. it's Jeff +1. Denise is my +1. That's the best part about being married is, who to bring to a wedding. And I always you kind of picture, Jesus like, hey, I know these guys for like, a couple days. Can I bring them all to the wedding? And so they all come to the wedding. And I think it's interesting. One, Jesus made the cut. Because when you have a wedding, now this is like the hard reality of things, especially in a world like with Facebook and everything or Instagram, you have everything you do in life you post online, everybody knows about. So then it's like you get engaged and like there's an obligatory picture of the ring, she said yes kind of thing. Everyone you ever know likes it. And then there's the awkward, you liked it, but I'm not inviting you to the wedding. And so it's true. It's because you can't afford it. And so Jesus makes the cut. Now, I think it's interesting. This is kind of a side. This is like a free sermon on the side. The other one I'm going to charge you for. No, I'm kidding. Jesus gets invited to the party. And it's interesting. What does Jesus do at the party? I wonder if he made him pray, though, because, that's... Whenever I get invited to something and there's a prayer, almost always it's like they look at me like I'm the only one who can pray. None of the rest of us have figured that out. Mm-hmm. Wait, do I say our Father? Like I don't, And so I don't mind. It's okay. But he's not praying. He's not preaching. He's just hanging out at the party. It's kind of reminiscent to me of a passage in Luke where Jesus says, for John the Baptist didn't spend his time eating bread or drinking wine, and you say he's possessed by a demon. So John was he was fasting, he was hanging out in the desert, he's wearing like rough clothing, he's doing everything kind of very austere, and they're like, oh man, religious people are like, he's got a demon, that's crazy. And then the Son of Man, which is Jesus' term for himself, on the other hand, feasts and drinks, and you say he's a glutton and a drunkard and a friend of tax collectors and other sinners. So Jesus kind of hung out with people. They liked him. They invited him to the party. Now, his purpose for going to the party was just to be Jesus-y to people. He loved on people, but he was a fun guy. Not a party animal, but it's kind of the side term is following Jesus shouldn't mean you're not fun. Mm-hmm. But it shouldn't mean you're not somebody people want to hang around. I think sometimes people get the idea when you come to faith, you have to be like boring.
Right.
Like, why? Like, boring is so boring. And, we have fun. We do silly things. It's okay. It's okay. Just don't do sinful things. That's a whole other story. But I picture this, because you picture this. This is a wedding. Now, those of you who are single, you know what I mean when I say this. You go to a wedding, and what does everybody ask you?
When it's your turn. When it's your turn.
Like, I see the eye rolling and everything. It's like, when are you getting married? Like, well... That's why I brought a +1, maybe, so you kind of shield me from that. Or, sometimes you don't even want to go because, oh gosh, the question. Jesus is like a 30-year-old Jewish guy. In a time where you get married a little bit younger. And so I'm sure everyone was like, hey, so Jesus, when are you going to find a nice Jewish girl and settle down? He's got different things on his mind. And so, they're going through the party and they run out of wine. Now, for some of you, you've been to weddings. Think for a second. Think about the reception.
Mm-hmm. That is a problem.
It would be good to run out of wine. For some of you, maybe it was okay. But maybe it'd be a good idea. You're picturing this is the first married fight. Because usually you wait till the day after. Well, actually, a lot of them happen on the day of. Oh my gosh, the things you see when you do a lot of weddings. I'm picturing, the bride. Like, seriously, you had one job. Bring the wine. You couldn't bring enough wine. Now you're going to hear me whine about it for a long time.
Oh.
That's why we cut down the guest list. It's your Uncle Malachi. And the wedding feast is this big deal. It's like a 7-day thing. Mm-hmm. So you're inviting a lot of people, and having enough wine is this important thing. It's a big social faux pas. It'd be like if you've ever been to a wedding. If not, it's really sad. But they're fun. They really are. But I didn't go to many. Until I started doing them. Now I go to them all the time. They're so much fun. But it'd be like, that they bring the wedding party in today. They bring them their food. They dismiss the first 2 tables to go up to the buffet. They go up to the buffet. And you're on table 3, and you're like, waiting. And they're like, oh, I'm sorry, we're out of food. But you came here to celebrate them. So you'll be fine, right? It would be awkward, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, they're out of something that's kind of important to the whole celebration. And so it says the mother of Jesus It's interesting. John doesn't actually use her name in his gospel, but we kind of know it's Mary from Matthew chapter 1, verse 18. We find out who she is. But, she comes up, and you're trying to picture this story. You're trying to understand, because it's kind of, if you know where the story's going, it's kind of a crazy story, isn't it? It's not like, this is Jesus' first big miracle, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. And, you kind of wonder, is Mary blaming him? Like, Jesus, you shouldn't have brought so many disciples. Your disciples are drinking all the wine, like Uncle Malachi. Didn't really have an Uncle Malachi.
Go on.
Or maybe it's like gossiping a little, expecting, is Jesus expected to go do a wine run? I mean, he was like a carpenter, so he could, I guess, carry big things, and she kind of expected something out of him, and this is big social faux pas. 7 days of feasting, and they're out. There's no more. And verse 4 is interesting because it says, "Woman, why do you involve me? My hour is not yet come." Woman. Doesn't that sound a little disrespectful?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
All the women said yes, and then kind of nodded slightly. I'm gonna go with yes. When in doubt, she's right. I mean, maybe the first miracle is that Mary didn't grab Jesus by the ear and go, "What?"
Right.
But it's not like if my kids walked up and said, "Woman," to my wife, I mean, we'd have a conversation.
Yeah.
There would be things to explain. There would be crying on their part. Mm-hmm. It seems disrespectful, but really, I think this is like one of those cultural things that are a little harder to translate, that don't really come out. And I think maybe a better translation, it's not disrespectful in that culture, and kind of like more like "dear" or "ma'am." So it's not a disrespectful. So Jesus is not dissing his mama. You get nothing else out of today. Jesus is not dissing his mama. It's like Southern people; they're so polite. I mean, it's like they always
They
no
do it undercover.
Undercover.
They bless your heart.
No, bless your heart, which is like code for they are such an idiot. Yeah, but they're always like you like it's funny when you meet a Southern person. You're like, "You don't have to call me sir." They're like, "Yes, sir."
Yeah.
Okay, but it's more respectful than we're thinking. And so my hour has not yet come. It's kind of not yet time to kind of publicly make a scene. And so you're kind of expecting at this point, Jesus isn't going to do anything, right? Mm-hmm. It kind of feels like that in the story. But his mother, apparently she kind of knows he's going to do something. He says to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." So Mary may have been kind of like partly in charge or something. We're not real sure. It's kind of small towns. It could have been like cousins or something. And so nearby, it says, nearby in verse 6, stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons.
Wow.
So ceremonial washing was, and we've talked about this a little bit, Jesus gets criticized because he doesn't wash his hands at one point. Mm-hmm. It's not that he's nasty and not wiping and washing and cleaning things off, but there's this ceremonial washing that was required, and then there weren't enough laws in the Old Testament. They made even more, and so there's all these different washings and things that would be done, and they made everything into a ritual. So they had giant things of water. Now it had to be stone. Interesting, because if it's clay things can become unclean, and then you have to break them and get new ones. So they carved out giant rock things. So there's this big stone thing, so it would never be ceremonially unclean. They don't have to get another one. So there's like 6 of these. And so I'm not great at math, but I'm thinking that's between 120 and 80 gallons. Mm-hmm. Now, someone who's better at math to follow along, tell me this is right. So I figured the standard bathtub, I looked on a website, and it said 45 to 50 gallons. So it's like 3 to 4 bathtubs full. Like these are big. Wow. Would be like a total of 3 to 4 bathtubs. It would be the equivalent of, between 16 and 23 kegs.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
What does it say about this church that understood that one? You don't understand bathtubs, but we understand kegs. And I may have done my math right here. I meant to have Denise check this for me because she can do math. The average bottle of wine today is like 750 milliliters. So calculating everything into metric can be between 600 and 900 bottles of wine.
Wow.
That would be the equivalent of how much there is here. So we're talking a lot of liquid.
Yeah.
This is important. It's important to know how much liquid there is, especially if you have little children, they drank it, and you're about to go on a car trip. That's another story. But it's kind of this crazy story. So Jesus says to the servants, fill the jars with water. So they filled them to the brim. He told them, now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet. They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He didn't realize where it had come from, that the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, everyone brings out the choice wine first and the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now. In other words, most people serve up the good stuff and then bring up the cheap stuff. Mm-hmm. Kind of like you still got wine, but you had the nice stuff. Some of you, it's, I'm not really a drinker, so it would be like you had the Coca-Cola and then you get the, pop, the generic stuff you get at Walmart. I'm sorry, there's all the other flavors are great, but generic cola just does not taste the same as Coca-Cola. Anyway, it's not a commercial for Coca-Cola, but I do like Coca-Cola. And so, and then it says in verse 11, what Jesus did here in Cana in Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. And after this, he went down to Capernaum with his mother and brothers and his disciples, and he stayed there for a few days. So, here's what's funny, I think, when you process it. So, Jesus' first big miracle, his first big public thing that reveals his glory, is helping out with a catering accident. Is, kind of, okay, well, we're going to reveal his glory by saving a catering disaster in the process, Is that, right before this we see, he's talking to Nathaniel, one of his disciples, and he kind of, Philip goes to get him, and he's like, Jesus is like, hey, it says back here in, the next day, Jesus decided to go to Galilee, found Philip, and said to him, come, follow me. And then Philip was from Bethsaida, Andrew and Peter's hometown. And Philip went to look for Nathanael and told him, we have found the very person Moses and the prophets wrote about. His name is Jesus, son of Joseph from Nazareth. And Nathanael's like, can anything good come out of Nazareth? And Philip's like, hey, come and see for yourself. And as he approached, Jesus said, now is there a genuine son of Israel, man of complete integrity? And how do you know about me? Nathanael asked Jesus, I could see you under the fig tree before Philip found you. Like, Jesus, like, hey, I can see things that aren't natural. And so Nathanael's like, Rabbi, you are the Son of God, the King of Israel. And, Jesus says, I tell you, kind of skipping down, I tell you the truth, you will see heaven open and the angels of God going up and down on the Son of Man, who's the one who is the stairway between heaven and earth. And so he's saying, you're going to see these great things. Is this it? Like, is Jesus saving a party? Now, and I know it's funny because Christians use this to debate whether you should drink alcohol or not. I really don't think that has anything to do with that.
It's irrelevant.
And I'm not going to kind of hit that topic because we concentrate on what we consider the big issues. There's little issues that Christians are always going to argue and fight about because that's what we do best sometimes. Mm-hmm. But we don't want to be known for that. We want to be known about big issues and the good things. And so what is going on here? And I think a couple things are going on, too. It's, when right after this, if you were to kind of flip over, I know this isn't in your notes, but it says, Jesus clears the temple. It's verse 13. It says it was nearly time for the Jewish Passover celebration, so Jesus went to Jerusalem. In the temple area, he saw merchants selling cattle, sheep, doves, and sacrifices. Also dealers at tables exchanging foreign money. And Jesus made a whip from ropes and chased them all out of the temple. That's kind of a sudden abrupt change. It's kind of this cool story. And he drove out the sheep and cattle, scattered the money changers' coins all over the floor, turned over the tables. And then going out over to the people who sold doves, he told them, get these things out of here, stop turning my Father's house into a marketplace. It's kind of this crazy story. And if you read this for the first time, you're like, well, I didn't think Jesus was supposed to get mad. Doesn't he walk around petting bunnies and halos and stuff? And he's always wearing white with a blue sash, and it seems out of character. And you're almost like, why does Jesus get so mad? Just because they're selling stuff? Mm. But in those days, there was this court called the Court of Gentiles. Now, guess what the Court of Gentiles was for?
The Gentiles.
The Gentiles. And so the idea was you couldn't really go into the temple unless you were Jewish. So there's this big court where the Gentiles could come near. And so God ultimately, God always provided for the inclusion of other people. It wasn't supposed to be this exclusive club that you had to be Jewish to get in. I'm glad, because I'm not Jewish. And so, what happened is, like, anyone ever been to a stadium? And you pay like $12 for a pretzel?
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Price
And
gouge.
you're like, oh, great, that's a great pretzel. You just have to kind of have to accept the fact when you go to like a big festival or something, you're going to pay a lot more. There's nothing like an $8 small Coke.
Right.
And that's kind of what was happening here, is that people would come from far off, and they would have a different currency. And so you had to have the right currency. And then you couldn't have certain currency because it had people's image on it, because you couldn't have like Caesar's coin in the temple treasury. So it's like all these things going on. So they had this money changing system. But if you ever travel, there's places to change your money in and places not to change your money. So this was a place not to change your money at a little higher rates, but guess where it was?
In the sanctuary.
In the court of the Gentiles. So you took up part of the room. Now you came and you had to offer sacrifice, right? Yeah, just yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
Trust me, that was the whole point of the temple thing. And so people would bring, if you bring a lamb from far off, it had to be perfect. So one, you're not going to like travel from Rome to like Jerusalem with a sheep. Now I don't know a lot about sheep things, but the former watermelon queen would tell us that you probably aren't going to want to carry a sheep that far, right? It'd be better to sell it, carry the money, and then buy one when you get there, right?
Right.
And so people, instead of bringing sheep, they'd buy them there. But you could buy them further out, like for cheaper, kind of like hot dogs at a stadium, or you could buy them at the big show, which was like slightly inflated. Let's just say. And guess where they put them? In the court of the Gentiles. And so Jesus is upset because people are doing the wrong thing. And so Jesus gets upset because his grace is supposed to be abundant. His grace is supposed to be for everybody. But he's upset because they kind of turn this into this overpriced marketplace. And the whole purpose of Jesus coming, and what this miracle shows us, is that God's grace is abundant. Now, how many bottles of wine did I say? 16 to 23 kegs, 600 to 900 bottles of wine. Someone check my math on that later. That's a lot. It's ridiculous. This is like a small town feast. You don't need that much. This is a month-long wedding. But the point is that God's grace is abundant. And it's for everyone. And so Jesus, there's this tension through the gospel, because if you know the story, you know where Jesus is headed. Now you may notice this is kind of the Easter season is upon us. And so we're starting a series that leads up to Easter. And if you haven't ever celebrated Easter, it's this holiday. It involves bunnies and eggs, but that really has nothing to do with the real meaning. Yeah. Although we can kind of stretch it and say it does. But it's ultimately the whole gospel is about God pouring out his grace on us. And it's about Jesus' death. It's about his burial. It's about his resurrection. And when we see that this wine and this celebration at the wedding at Cana, remind us that the ultimate fulfillment is coming. There was more wine than you needed. It was abundant. And God's grace through his shed blood is abundant. It's beyond what's necessary. And God always includes others. And when we put our faith in Jesus, we have access to that abundance, that grace. And so really, the story is not about how Jesus partied at a wedding. It's about how he provides grace in abundance, because we all need it. And when we put our faith in him, we see our lives changed. We live a different way. The Holy Spirit comes inside of us. Now, we fight that, because sometimes I like my old stuff. I like to live the old way. But God comes in to transform and change us and make us into someone new. And see, that's the good news that we get to celebrate this Easter season. that Jesus provides abundant forgiveness. So come and see. This Easter season, we're going to look at, these miracles of Jesus, these things he did. But the bigger and the fuller meaning is that he came for us.
Mm-hmm.
He came to offer grace. As the worship team comes back to play,